Okay, let's move on to the next section. We discussed the question of presumably the obligation. It seems this part of the shiur, this part of the unit, discusses the obligation of adding time before Yom Kippur. I just wanted before Yom Kippur, before Shabbos, before Shemitah. I pointed out that according to the Meiri here, are we saying there's a mitzvah to do it, or do we need to redefine the time frame of Shabbos and Yom Tov, etc.? So that's just pointing that out over here. Now we'll go on to David's question. David pointed out, hold on, if it's a time frame issue, so you need to ask, I'd say, to answer these two questions, you have to answer two other questions. Number one, how much time are you required to add, and is there a specific requirement? That's number one. Number two, over there, how much time can you add, right? Right, as I said, and I'll just point out the two aspects here that I mentioned earlier. I think Tosefet Shabbat, generally speaking, can be seen one of two ways. Way number one is you are required to show up early. How early? Don't know. Early. Early means early. I don't know. Early. Yeah, to show up early. Out of respect of Shabbos, Yom Kippur, etc., you need to show up early. And then you'd say there's a mitzvah to honor Shabbos by coming early. Now you might say that's part of the general mitzvah of honoring Shabbos in general. You honor it with your meat, you honor it with your songs, and you honor it with showing up early. And then, right, the Meiri points out no one mentions as a mitzvah to add time to Shabbos and Yom Kippur. It's not counted as one of the Torah mitzvot or mentioned as one of the details of the mitzvah. Two reasons why not. Reason number one, Tosefet Shabbat is just a time frame issue. It just tells you Shabbos actually starts 25 minutes before. It doesn't mean that it's not another separate mitzvah. It just like you'd say, okay, when is Shkia exactly, right? It doesn't say anywhere that there's a mitzvah to stop doing Malacha on Erev Shabbos at 4:46 specifically, even though that happens to be Shkia today, I think, right? That's not the way we work. What we're saying is something more simple. We're saying when Shabbos begins, you have to stop. When does Shabbos begin? Okay, it's another question. It's not another mitzvah. It's another question. You get an answer. So that's one way.
So, I mean, I know that we set a time for Shkia, but Shkia really isn't a specific, time depending on where you are with respect to altitude or where you are,
Okay.
and Shkia can, and even the sun going down could take a certain period of time. And it takes actually a different period of time in different parts of the world. So Shkia's, we certainly settled on how we define it, but it's really not as specific as it sounds.
I think Shkia isn't
it's not exact.
Isn't specific enough. I think I'm going to address part of this soon. So we're going to see the ambiguity of Shkia, right? Is a problem and an issue, right? Maybe I'll say that already now.
Okay.
In a sense, it seems that you always have to have Tosefet Shabbat just because we're concerned about the question of when the Shabbos actually begin, right? Okay, we're not sure exactly when the Shabbos begin. Does Shabbos begin at Shkia or at Tzedek Chavim? But even before that, when I say Shabbos starts, let's assume, okay, we'll go to Chumash, Shabbos starts at Shkia. Says Glenn, okay, define Shkia. Not such a simple question. It's funny, where I live, we, my family, not we and you guys, I mean me and my family, we live in a neighborhood in Efrat where the neighborhood across from us to our west is on this like hill. It's quite a hill. So the sun goes down like really 25 minutes before we see sundown up there on the hill, like 25 minutes before the true halachic sundown, right? So again, there's something ambiguous, something unclear about when exactly is Shkia and when exactly we have to start being concerned that, oh, now it might be Shabbos. So presumably when you say Tosefet Shabbat, does that mean this might add a third option, right? I said one option is you need to add some time, right? There's a time frame actually starts 25 minutes before Shkia. One way. Another way of looking at it is come early. How early? I don't know. Come early. The third option is avoid all ambiguity, meaning start Shabbos at a time that's definitely before the next day begins. And that's it. Right? And then just a matter of being careful not to transgress Shabbos.
There's a midrash that Hashem nichnas Shabbat kechut hasera,
right?
But only He's able to do that. So maybe Tosefet Shabbat is like the human way of,
right,
coping with that problem, with that limitation.
Nachon. So let's see a few sources that will show these aspects. So source number one, the Gemara in Beit Tzedaf Lamed says, generally speaking, we say Hanachlam leYisrael mutav shiur shogegin v'alu mezidin. This means people are doing something wrong, but if you tell them off, they're just going to do it wronger. Why? Because I know that's not a word. Why? Because until now they were doing it unintentionally. Now you tell them, this is wrong. Now they're going to do it intentionally, right? So it's better to not say anything because currently they're doing an Isser that's not as bad because it's unintentional. Once you tell them off, then it becomes intentional. That's a problem. A bigger problem. It's a problem. They do it unintentionally as well, but it becomes a bigger problem. At least they can argue that's unintentional. Then it becomes intentional. That's a problem. It says the Gemara, this is only true about Drabanan. When it comes to things that are Doraita, you should tell them off. And if they don't listen, they don't listen. But they're going against the Torah. You should tell them the truth. When it comes to Drabanan have their own. Drabanan has its own status because Drabanan, the interest in Drabanan is to keep you from falling off the other side. So if people are going to transgress the Drabanan, even if I tell them, so better they break the Drabanan by mistake. But when it comes to Doraisa, you have to tell them the truth. Says the Gemara, wait, Lohi, I can prove that this isn't true. I can prove this isn't true. That really you shouldn't tell them off even if they're transgressing Doraisa. How do I know? Tosefet Yom Kippurim Doraitahu, v'achle v'shatu ad shechashecha, v'lo amrin lu v'lo midi. They eat until what does it say?
Which in the context, seemingly you have to say that it's until the second of sunset, let's say, the second that Yom Kippurim starts, because if it was actually going into Yom Kippur, then it would not have anything to do with Tosefet Yom Kippurim.
Right. Had the Gemara not said this sentence, that Tosefet Yom Kippurim Doraitahu, the Gemara just said, I would have said, people are actually eating on what is effectively Yom Kippur. That's definitely Isur D'Oraisa. And still you don't say anything. Why? Because they don't know exactly when it starts. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says they're transgressing Tosefet Yom Kippur D'Oraita. Right? Now, so when did they stop eating? Obviously not at a time that's already Yom Kippur. They're eating at a time that should have been Tosefet Yom Kippur, right? In order to say that, you have to say that the time Tosefet is very clearly defined, right? Presumably, right? You see what I'm saying? Let's say I know that the earliest time the earliest time you can estimate Shkia is today at 4:46. Okay, so if someone eats until 4:45, right? I'm just saying, in our world, you can take a watch and actually see the exact minute. In their world, I don't think it could be quite as precise. They have to stop at a time that they know is not yet Shkia, and yet is not a few minutes before either. Right? Because if they stop 5 minutes before Shkia, I say, yeah, I added 5 minutes, right? In their world where Shkia was even more ambiguous than God saying Shkia is something ambiguous, today we have ways of measuring exactly where the sun is in relation to the world and define Shkia in a very certain way, right? And say 446. That's very new, right? That didn't exist in their time. In their time, you said, okay, now it's close enough to Shkia, you have to stop. Otherwise, you're not breaking Tosefet Yom Kippur. You're breaking what would be, you're transgressing what would be eating on Yom Kippur itself, because I'm just not sure when Yom Kippur actually starts. So that's Tosefet's proof over here. Tosefet say, Mashma de Shiur Tosefet Yom Kippurim tzarich lafsik mibod yom. Da'avodai lo yochlim mamash ad chashicha. Da'avdei Isur deoraita. This is just a different Isur deoraisa of Geshen Yom Kippur. Afapichen kama utav shiur Yisrael shogin dal yom mezidin. It can't be that they're actually eating on Yom Kippur. It must be that they're eating at the time of Tosefet. What is the time of Tosefet? It must be that Tosefet is a defined amount of time. So I must say Tosefet must be at 18 minutes. And then when they're eating 5 minutes, when they stop eating 5 minutes before, because they have to stop sometime before. If they stop eating 3 minutes before Shkia, I say, you didn't adhere to the chiyuv of adding 18 minutes to Yom Kippur.
This Tosefet saying Avdei Isura that it's an Isur, whereas Tosefet might be Naseh, positive commandment there, and so it's lighter than Avdei Isura Doraita.
Nachon. That's a good point. Right, Tosefet is pointing out, David is pointing out, or Tosefet is pointing out, right, that the assumption here is that we're not talking about an Isur, or that they're not adhering to an aseh, a chiyuv to add time, which, by the way, right, could relate to, I think this could work, could relate to the Meiri over here, right? We said a similar thing over here. Right, when you eat at the time of Tosefet Yom Kippur, let's say it's Doraisa, fine, Doraisa. But what did you do? Did you break Yom Kippur? Did you actually eat on Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur actually starts 25 minutes before Yom Kippur or whatever the time frame will define, and then you ate on Yom Kippur, or are you only transgressing the aseh of showing up early? Says David. Tosefet is looking at it as a chiyuv to add time. You have to show up early. And that fits in well with the fact that they're saying, and then how early? I don't know, anything.
But then that throws off the
Gemara.
Gemara.
It's the other way around, right? Full. Yeah, I said a full, right? Then, why? Because you're saying what?
If the Gemara is talking about Mutav Shogigim Ayu Bezidim, you're going to tell me, but really we're only talking about a mitzvah, and it says, I can prove to you that even when we do Doraita, we say that. Maybe we only say that with Din Tosefet because it's a mitzvah to say.
Right. Maybe it's only an aseh doraita, not an isur doraita. Right? Because that's the question. The question
is the whole lashon of Mizidim, like in Shogigim, sounds like it's talking about, I think, an alota aseh. But in any case,
I tend to think that there are isurei aseh, right? My intuition agrees that Mezidin and Shogigin is a context of Isurim. On the other hand, when you talk about an Isur Aseh, meaning an Isur that's not defined, right? Not defined as a lav, and defined as an Aseh, right? You have to actively add time by refreshing.
But in any case, if you see it as an Aseh, then it's hard to generalize from it, which the Gemara seems to do.
I agree, it's a good point. I'll try looking at the Gemara afterwards to see why Tosefet said this, because Tosefet is emphasizing Avdei Isur Midoraita. The question is, what do they mean? They mean Tosefet Shabbat isn't really Doraisa? Which is what the Meiri said earlier, right? The Meiri said, when you say Tosefet Yom Kippurim Doraita here, what we mean is, right? The Meiri said, Tosefet Yom Kippurim Doraita, we mean is Yom Kippur is Doraisa. I don't mean Tosefet is Doraisa, I mean Yom Kippur is Doraisa. If Yom Kippur is Doraisa, you should be telling people start fasting on time, early, right? That's the way the Meiri interpreted the sentence, right? The question is, what are Tosefet doing with this? It's a fair point. Okay, so that's the first Gemara that raises this question of, is there a specific amount of time that has to be adhered to? There's a Gemara in Pesachim that says that brings a source that Bein Hashmashot of Yom Kippur is asur just like Yom Kippur itself, right? The eve as you begin Yom Kippur is just as asur as Yom Kippur itself. Say Tosefet, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean Bein Hashmashot? Afilu v'day yom semuch l'chashecha asur. What do you mean, bein hashmashot? Why are you saying bein hashmashot of Yom Kippur is asur? You should say 20 minutes before Yom Kippur, before bein hashmashot is asur as well, right? Say Tosefot the following: Sheva mishum desagi b'tosefet mashu nakitachi. Meaning, you have to start bein hashmashot. Okay, I have to start 5 minutes before bein hashmashot. Why? 2 minutes before? I don't know. At some point before bein hashmashot, but some point which is not really discernible from bein hashmashot. Meaning, you have to start before bein hashmashot. Otherwise, it'll already be bein hashmashot. When will you stop eating? You have to stop eating when you know it's not yet bein hashmashot, right? You can't stop at bein hashmashot. It doesn't work. You have to stop when it's not yet bein hashmashot, right? But stopping at not yet bein hashmashot doesn't create a discernible daytime in which you're fasting, right? Because you just start stopping a couple of minutes before bein hashmashot. That doesn't give you a discernible time, right? And that's why it's fair to say you have to stop bein hashmashot. Really, you have to stop a bit before. How much? Nothing, whatever, anything. Not nothing, but anything. And therefore, this, by the way, this, to me, this sounds a bit like the issue is not reaching a suffix, right? Someone here expressed this as well. The obligation is not to reach a point of ambiguity, right? Before that ambiguity sets in, you have to already stop, right? And then you can't really discern a specific amount of time. And that's why is it fair to say, I'm saying, I want to emphasize, how did Tosefot go from question to answer here, right? The question is, why are you saying bein hashmashot? You should say daytime before Yom Kippur as well. Tosefot's answer is, it's enough to add anything. How does that answer the question? It answers the question by saying there's no discernible amount of time. Once you say that, what you're saying is you just need to not be ambiguous. And then Tosefot would say one of two things, presumably, I think. The way of learning this Tosefot is one of two ways. Either you say you have to stop before you reach the ambiguity, and then when I say Tosefet Yom Kippur, what I mean is the chiyuv to not be besafek. The chiyuv to not reach that sfek d'oraisa, maybe I'm eating on Yom Kippur. One way of reading the Tosefot. Another way of reading Tosefot is show up early, right? As I said, the mitzvah taseh would be show up early. What I said before about the connection between this and kavod, ועונג, Shabbat. The way, if you really respect Shabbos, show up 20 minutes early. How much? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Discernibly early, before the receptionist tells you, here, come in. Receptionist in our case being tzva marom, right? Receptionist being the sun setting and the stars coming out, etc. Right? But you should show up for your meeting before the receptionist says, hey, where are you? How much before? I don't know. It doesn't matter. And then what we mean is by the time the receptionist is ready to call you in, you have to be there. And that's a mitzvah. That's how you honor Shabbos. So I just want to point out two ways I see of reading this Tosefot. Way number one is, I'll start from the second this time. Way number one is you have to show up early. How much earlier? I don't know. The point is respect Shabbos. Have respect. Understand Shabbos is coming. You have to stop. How long before? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Any time. Way number two is don't reach the ambiguity. Maybe they're one and the same, but maybe Tosefot is just saying this isn't even part of Kavod Shabbos or Kavod Yom Kippur. It's just a matter of this is a very serious thing. You have to not be besafek, not out of respect or honor, just a chiyuv to adhere to the safek, to be aware of the problem that the safek imposes. So that's the two ways of reading this. Tosefot is very different, but just want to present two ways. Hold on. And the Tosefot, as opposed to the Tosefot here, who says based on the Gemara in Beitza, where we talk about people are transgressing Tosefet Yom Kippur, presumably there has to be a certain amount of time that is discernible, right? Tosefot's point about the Gemara Pesachim is the time is not discernible. Tosefot here say, based on the Gemara here, there must be a discernible amount of time. Someone want to say something?
I was just going to ask this svara about not getting to a time where it's ambiguous. Shouldn't that be like a din b'chol Torah kula? Like why do you need a special din of Tosefet Shabbat?
I agree.
You can't be, ambiguous with any Isur Doraita.
Obviously, that what jumped to my head is the Machloket Rambam and Rashba, right? There's a famous Machloket Rambam and Rashba.
That's what I was going to say. There's a special din, the Safek Doraita, the Chumra, Midoraita, only on Shabbat.
Right. Exactly.
Is that what you're going to say?
I was going to say, if you want to propose that option, yes. If you want to, I gave another option. I'm just saying, if you want to propose that option, you have to assume, like the Rambam, that's Sfekot Midoraita or Lekula general. In other words, the Torah doesn't obligate you. The Torah did not say you have to not. I went in circles just now. The Torah doesn't tell you what to do in ambiguous situations. And then there's certain cases in which the Torah tells you, don't reach this ambiguous situation. So I agree. That's why I presented two ways of reading Tosefot, because I don't know if they agree. I don't know if this specific, again, there's a machloket in the Tosefot here, right? There's Tosefot in Beitza that says one thing, so the Rosh Hashanah says a different thing, right? I'm saying the Tosefot in Rosh Hashanah that proposes this is assuming the Rambam about Sfek Doraita lo yodea. But I think it's fair to propose that. I presented another option, right? If you don't like that option, you say you always have to keep away from Safek. So the other option is to say the obligation is show up early. Show up before the receptionist is ready to call you in. Let's quickly go through the rest of this point and then we'll end. The Uraim holds like the first Tosefot, the second, sorry. Sometime before B'nai Shmashot. How much? I don't know. Any time before B'nai Shmashot. Shulchan Aruch says the same. So now, the Ramban says the following: בכאן הביא העניין לפרש דבר נעלה מדעת רבים. שהראשונים לא הרחיבו בפירושו והוזמן תוספת לזה שמוסיפים ביום כיפור ושבתות וימים טובים בכל קודש. בוודאי קודם בין השמשות הוא, והתוספת עשה. ובין השמשות ספק לא נשכרת ומיטה וחיוב השם תלוי. So he says, it's obviously has to be out of the time that's not ambiguous. Right? If it's at the time that's ambiguous, so then you have to machmir, because it's a safek, by the way, Yaakov, like the Rashba, the Ramban, the Rashba, right? Who said it's Midoraita is l'chumra, Midoraisa, right? You always have to machmir in all sfekot the Midoraita already, without this pasuk, right? Just pointing out. So that doesn't mean that the Tosefot is like the Rambam. I'm just saying the Ramban in line with Rashba is good, right?
100%.
Ela, says the Rambam, I'm continuing from Kodem ben Shmashot hu, Shiur ben Shmashot is a machloket, Maskana mishetishka chama havi ben Shmashot atzadek kochavim, ken Tosefet hazeh kodem shkiat hachama. So when we say Tosefet, what we mean is the time that's before shkiat hachama, that you have to add time that's unambiguous. That's what the Ramban is saying here. Possibly different from the way we said about Tosefot, right? Possibly arguing with the Tosefot that we just explained. Lemaise, let's see a bit of Lemaise. After we analyzed all that, let's see a bit of Lemaise. Says the Chayei Adam, you should add half an hour before Tzedek Chavim. If you add the time of B'nai Shmashot, we're adding about 12 minutes. So we're talking about something like 12 minutes. That's what seems to be according to the Chayei Adam and the Mishnah Berurah. But the Uraim, some Rishonim already disagree with the Ramban and say that Mishishka Chama is before sunset, and therefore they say you should stop half an hour before Shkia. Half an hour, 20 minutes before Shkia. This is what we do. When is candlelighting time? How is candlelighting time defined?
In a lot of places, it's 18 or 20 minutes before sunset. In Yerushalayim, it's 40 minutes before sunset.
Right. So once again, you see the harchavot that you're mentioning. Once again, you always Yaakov always gets the harchavot, right? So
you asked the question.
Yeah, no. It's good. It's good. but the prevalent minhag is about 20 minutes before Shkia, right? In adherence to this. And then when if you light candles, say the Mishnah Berurah says, if you light candles 20 minutes before Shkia, you're also adhering to the Yereim, who says you need to start Shabbos 18 minutes before that. Really, Shkia, going back to Glenn's question, Shkia is 18 minutes before the sun disappears. So again, we have a time, just a bit confusing. I mean, we start talking about math, people get lost. So I'm gonna do this again. You have the time that the sun disappears. That's what we generally call Shkia. Most Rishonim hold that's Shkia, and that until then, it's unambiguously Friday. Now, the Yereim says, no, when the sun starts setting, and when the sun starts setting, 18 minutes before the sun disappears. And therefore, says Mishnah Berurah, you should add 20 minutes in adherence to that. And that way you added 2 minutes, which is a discernible, the shortest discernible amount of time before the time the Yereim is talking about. That's the best thing to do. Of course, that this is a chumrah. So Mishnah Berurah, it's a chumrah. It's a good chumrah. It's a good chumrah to have the Tosefet Shabbat, right? Right? It's good to it's a good thing to add more. Of course, if you put the last minute before the receptionist, you show the last minute. It's more mechubad to be there well in time. But it's still a chumrah to adhere to the Yereim as well, and therefore it's best really to start Shabbos at candlelighting. Best really to start Shabbos at candlelighting time that we have on the luchot. Of course, b'diavad and maz b'diavad, not adhering to the chumrah is still okay for another 18 up to 18 minutes after. So. Just a recap of this last thing. Where the Gemara in Beit said it seemed to imply there is a specific amount of time that would be considered Tosefet Yom Kippur. That's the Tosefet said based on that. The Gemara in Pesachim that says that you need to that Beinash Mashad of Yom Kippur has to be adhered just like the day. Says Tosefet, that means that you just have to not be ambiguous. You have to add time that's clearly before, but no specific amount of time. We see the Yereim says you have to add, agrees with this. Shulchan Aruch follows suit, and therefore the bottom line is, most poskim say if you're going to go with the Mekel opinion, you should start Shabbos 8-12 minutes before Shkia, and if you're going to go with the Machmir opinion and start well before Shkia, it's enough to do just a couple of minutes, and that would suffice based on this same Shulchan Aruch.